How's it going, everybody? Welcome to this week's LUMIX Live. We are continuing the conversation this week about the recent firmware update that we released for the S5 Mark II, Mark IIX, G9 Mark II, and the GH7. Because as of last week, the plan was to obviously cover a lot about the firmware updates, but we did also get a ton of other questions. So I wanted to kind of come back into this and really kind of go over all the other stuff that was added in it, answer your questions about the various features that are included in the update, and just kind of wrap out what we've got before we go on a short little break next week with a pre-recorded session on the 13th. So, I've got my S5 Mark IIX hooked up here so I can jump in, show you all through the menu system, kind of talk about and demonstrate what the features do and how you can access them. As we go through this, if you have questions, be sure to drop them in the chat. Just make sure to tag at LUMIX USA. It's easier for me to see them. As you can see, Dustin has dropped a comment down in there as well. And also, feel free to leave comments. If you want me to see them, tag at LUMIX USA. It's just easier. Before we go into the actual topic, I want to remind those in the United States about LUMIX Pro services. We have the red and the platinum tier available in the US. Red tier is free, so if you've purchased a LUMIX camera, it's got to be a new purchase. Use a QR code, get yourself registered. It gets you into the service and support program, so should you ever have any issues, you've got a direct path to be able to support for your camera for service and support reasons. If you're someone who likes a higher level of service and support, or maybe you're a working professional and you have your equipment serviced once a year while you're actually between seasons, maybe you can take a look at the platinum tier. Platinum tier is a paid level service that is going to get you all the benefits of red. But on top of that, you're also going to get 2-day repairs with next day shipping both ways, 20% off out of warranty repairs, so just drops, breaks, stuff like that, you get a discount. You also get access to our membership hotline if you'd prefer to speak to somebody instead of going through emails or chat. And then you also have the ability to send your equipment in for sensor cleanings, lens calibrations, firmware updates, all that kind of stuff. Basically all the maintenance stuff that if you don't want to handle it yourself, you can have us do it on our side. So I encourage you to take a look. We have the QR code on the screen now. You can follow that or link down in the description. If you're not joining us from the US and you're interested in if LUMIX Pro service is available in your region, there is a global link down in the chat in the description as well. So you can check it out there and be able to kind of see if it's available for you. So let's see here. There's been a bunch of chats coming through. One of the first ones that came up, Martin, and this is kind of also related. So with the firmware updates that we released, these also added support for LUMIX Lab with the 4 cameras. So you've got the full functionality available with it. But this question, or this comment in here is something I do want to address because I've seen a couple people that may have been having some issues, and there's some troubleshooting I know how to that has worked for others in the past. Comments from Martin. It says, I'm using a LUMIX G9 Mark II. It's impossible to pair the phone to the camera to your Android phone. No problems with LUMIX Sync though. This makes the app useless, and arguably devalues your camera. So, question I'd have for you, Martin. So I use both iOS and Android. One of the first things, if you're still here and if you're able to drop the comment down after this so that we can address it maybe a little bit later, is what Android phone are you using and what Android operating system are you on? Those are usually the first 2 things that I check. If it's a much older device, so prior to like Android 10, I believe those devices, if you look at the app as far as what requirements are for it, there's some compatibility things with much earlier. That's usually not the case, but I always like to at least kind of check that first, make sure that it's not something simple like that. But outside of that, one of the things to double check with the app itself is go into the app settings, make sure that all the permissions are granted. So Bluetooth, location, photos access. First, try making sure that everything is given access to it, because you can always go back in and remove things a little bit later. Like if you don't want all the photos access, or if you don't use GPS and you don't want location, you can always go in and change those things later. But start with everything being given access to it, and make sure that it's not something as simple as Bluetooth hasn't been given access to the app. That was a common thing when we first released LUMIX Lab, because in some cases people were enabling it and then just not having the background Bluetooth being able to be connected. That would stop you from being able to connect. The other thing to double check, and this can happen, it happens on Android phones, happens on iOS devices as well too, is double check the Wi-Fi connection there. So when you go through the process, because of the way Wi-Fi is handled, especially on newer versions of iOS and Android, when you go to make that connection and you have the Bluetooth done and all that kind of stuff, if you're getting to that point of it, the phone's going to pop up, or the tablet's going to pop up and say, hey, do you want to connect to this device? Some Android devices will say always connect, only connect this one time, or don't let it connect. An easy way to troubleshoot this is when you go into your phone settings, you can force it to forget the camera's Wi-Fi connection. And then this way it basically starts the whole thing over from scratch. Another thing that you can do, and I'll show you this on the camera in a second, is you can reset just the network settings on the camera so that it basically is a fully, blank slate to start with. I can tell you, like 9 out of 10 times that clears up any of the connection issues that some people might have. Especially if you had been connected through, LUMIX Sync, or, just using any of the other Wi-Fi functions. When firmware gets updated, it is typical common practice or expected practice that when you do a firmware update, you should reset your camera and then load in your camera settings. This way there's no leakage of, like, hey, maybe this setting was changed, and especially with a firmware update like the recent one that added a ton of functionality to the camera. This makes sure that everything works the way it's supposed to after you do an update. So if you can drop in the chat like what Android phone you're using, what version of the Android OS you're using, and confirm that your app is updated from the Play Store, we can then try to troubleshoot a little bit further down. What else was here? Dustin, can Lumix be the first camera on Mars? Sure. That would be cool. That'd be actually kind of interesting. Depends on who's going to send it up, though. Nice to see you again. Hope everything's well. Very nice to see you too, Macari. Any info on S1 and S1R firmware updates that were released? Not much info on the web page. Yes, so I will also talk about that as well. TechMixer, hoping for true whole frame rates in an update. Some accessories like Edelkrone Vision module require whole numbers for frame rates. Is that possible? The S5 IIX. I would double check that, because if Edelkron's Vision stuff works with other manufacturers, we say 24, 30, and 60p in the cameras, but they're running at 59.9, 59.94, 23.98, and 29.97. That would be true for like all camera brands. We do have a true 24 version. You just have to put the camera into cinema mode, but that'll be only 24 frame. I'm going to look at 2 more questions real quick, and then we're going to go into actually talking about, we're going to start with frame guides on this. Is the 24 hertz mode on the GH7 limited to only 4K 24 FPS at 422, or would 48 422 be possible via firmware update? I believe 24 hertz is locked to 24 frame, like proper 24 frame, because it's designed as if you're going to be doing cinema work with it. So yeah, I can double check, but my understanding is that it's when you're in 24, it's gonna be 24. So, okay, all right, cool. So let's actually dive in and talk about the firmware updates, so that I don't get too sidetracked this week. So, with the recent updates that we did for the S5 Mark II, Mark IIX, the GH7, and the G9 Mark II, we added a bunch of added functionality into these cameras. And some of this stuff, versions of it had been in the cameras before, but we've refined the experience and we've kind of given a lot more control over this stuff. So we're going to start right at the base with frame guides. We have talked about frame guides before on a couple of streams in the past. But frame guides, for those that have never used them before, frame guides are designed really just as a tool to help you just frame your images, right? These aren't going to burn into the footage. These aren't going to be something that, you know, when you get them set up, they're going to be like permanently set up there. And then when you bring your footage in, they're automatically going to crop into these. So just kind of keep that in mind. These are so that you can pre-visualize where your crops are going to be later. So the way you find these in the camera, once you're up to date on the most recent firmware, is you're going to go down into the cog menu, or the gear icon, and then you're going to scroll down, and you're going to come across frame guides or frame markers. Once you go down into here, you're going to see a set option. This is where you can go in and you can reprogram each of these. So you can say, hey, I want to use these different frame markers. There's a couple new things that have been added in with this firmware as well. So when you go into frame aspects, you're going to notice that there's a 17:9 aspect ratio now. So for those that film in Cinema 4K or C4K, this would be your 17:9, C4K aspect ratio. So you can now overlay those instead of just 16:9. It's just designed to give you a lot more accurate view. You have the cinema-oriented aspect ratio, so 2:1, 2:35, and 2:39:1. You also have 1:8:5:1, so various different crop guides there. But then you'll also notice we have all the social media ones down the bottom, so 5x4 and 4x5. So we have all of them plus their inverse versions, so their horizontal and their vertical variants for it. Two new ones that got added was 6x7 and 7x6 within this firmware as well. So you will have just more choices for how you want to frame these things. And especially when it comes to social media kind of delivery, we always think, and I know I've done this before, we talk about social media delivery and we always default to 9x16, right? So vertical video delivery. And there's still a lot of people that are, kind of really not down with vertical capture or vertical delivery, and that's totally cool. It's always up to whatever your vision, your client work is, whatever you need out of the camera. But the reason why you have things like 4x5 and 5x4 is that if you've been on, platforms like Instagram, right? You want to share on the largest canvas that you can without necessarily going into vertical, 4x5 and 5x4 can be a really easy way to have those frame guides up and know, okay, when I do my crop, or if I'm just going to take my full-blown 3x2 image, when I bring it into the app and say I want to load it up, this is going to let you see what the largest is that you can end up actually posting it. So you can kind of keep that in mind ahead of time before you go into bringing it in and realizing that, maybe one person was a little too far to the side and you've cut off one of their arms for the framing. So across the board, these things are going to work great for both photo and video use. They're not just limited to, kind of just being used in the video side. With the update, you've got the addition of 3 of them, so you can deploy all 3 of them at once. You can deploy only 2 of them if you want. Just kind of coming in, picking which ones you want, allows you to be able to go in there and fully address and kind of change these how you want. The other things here is you have frame masks, which I'll show you in a second what they look like. You can change the opacity of these, so if you really only want to focus on what's within those frame guides, you've got it. Or if you just want to keep them up and only have the lines up, you can do that as well. And then there's live view frame adjustment. This is the ability to be able to use the touch screen to adjust the framing, the size, the position, where they are on the screen on the fly and not have to go menu diving with it. So if we wanted to activate these, you have a couple different things that you can do. So for one, you can do what I just did here, go into the menu, select on, and then now they're on. And that's great, but that involves a number of button presses. Now you're having to go into the menu, and it's not as seamless, especially if you're filming, since you don't have menu access while you're actually rolling a video recording. So in this case, what you can do is you can program a custom function button. So in this case, I just press and held the right direction arrow, And I'm going to scroll down through the list here, and I'm going to go to where it says frame marker here. Now, within this new firmware update, we've added 2 options for frame marker. When you click in, you have the frame marker option. So if I set it to that, now when I press the right button or the right directional pad button, I'm toggling them on and off. This will let you do it on the fly so that you don't always have to have those frame guides up. If you're using them just to check your framing and then you want a clean looking image, cool, you've got it. But if I want to be able to adjust these, and say I don't have access to the touchscreen, either because of the way my rigging is set up or whatever, we added in another ability to be able to come in here, go back down to that frame marker option, and then, not photo guides, frame marker, and then do change size and position. So now what this lets me do is press down on the directional pad, and I can use the dials on the back of the camera, so the front and rear dial, as well as the joystick, to move this around however I need it to be moved, resize it however I want it to size. This way I can truly customize these if I don't have access to the touchscreen. If you want to toggle through them, you just press the Q button, and then you can shift the different guides around. So I can get that one set where I want it, do it again, and then now I've got my, I think this is the 2:3:9:1 aspect ratio setup. So now I've got that ability to kind of just fully customize these how I want them to be and change them on the fly without having to dive into a menu in the modern cameras. And then, like I said before, is as I'm filming, if I'm like, okay, cool, I'm good, I don't really need these up anymore, just press one of the custom function buttons that you've assigned it to, and now they're off. So now you've got a clean looking image, and you're not going to have to sit and always see those frame guides if you don't want them on there. Let's double check. There were a bunch more questions and comments that came through, so I definitely want to double check and make sure we're addressing some of those. Let's see here, McCary, missed last week's stream, but never too late to say thank you for bringing all these nice features, the S5 II and G9 Mark II. Good work, Lumix. Yes, we're super excited about constantly bringing these kinds of updates. Rhett, you got my live email, correct? Yes, we did. Matt and I did get it. I just haven't had a chance over the last week to give you a reply yet. But yes, I 100% did get it. Let's see here. First Mars mission. Let's make it happen. I got you on board. Okay. McGarry, S9 has synchro scan for photos. So useful, especially because lots of venues have old lighting here. Any chance for this on the S5 Mark II and G9 Mark II as well? They have video synchro. It's something that we have brought up to the engineering team. The S9 has synchro scan for photography for a very specific reason. Obviously, the S9 has no mechanical shutter, so things like banding could potentially be more visible when you're shooting in fully electronic shutter. Since the S5 Mark II and the G9 Mark II and the S5 Mark IIX have mechanical shutters, usually that's not something that would be of a concern. But we did bring it up that, you know, since we have it and we do it on the S9, is it something that could make it into the other cameras as well? I don't have a clear answer as to whether or not it is going to be something or could be something. But at this time, I haven't seen any plans for that to be added. It can be incredibly useful, but yeah, S9, it's more out of because it needs it for not having the mechanical shutter, so there's no alternative to if you're in a situation with bad lighting and you've got banding. So, text, so put the camera in cinema mode. Edelkron explicitly says 2997, 5994 don't work. I believe the FX330 got updated to support whole frame rates. That's interesting. I will bring it up to the engineering team. To be honest with you, Tech Mixer, it's incredibly rare to see that kind of thing, especially because in like 99% of use cases, you wouldn't be using full frame rates because you actually, like, you're going to run into audio problems, potentially audio syncing problems. But I can point people to take a look at that, the device from Edelkron, and, you know, just kind of let them know that that's something that's out there. Unless things get a really, really large response from people saying like, hey, we need this in the camera, I can't really say that there's probably a high likelihood of it, but yeah. We'll always bring it up, though. Can you explain how to add anamorphic D-squeeze to HDMI output, if possible? If not currently possible, can we have it as a firmware update? Just a firmware request. Monitors mess it up. De-squeezing over HDMI isn't going to happen. It falls outside of the HDMI specifications. HDMI specification for frame rate and video signal transfer requires certain approved aspect ratios and frame rates and resolutions for things to happen. So even if it were something that would end up potentially happening, it would end up being enclosed in a 3840 by 2160 frame. So you'd have massive letterboxing when you would do it. But ultimately, because we adhere very strictly to the HDMI specifications, since we are part of the group that makes the standards, depending on what it's used for, how it's deployed for HDMI, depends on what ratios and stuff can be done on it. So yeah, we don't do D-squeeze over HDMI. I don't believe it's a fully technical thing. There is some technical side behind it, because now you have to live process and take that footage and de-squeeze it and potentially be able to record it that way, because you'd be sending it out over an HDMI feed. There's a whole lot involved with that kind of thing, and that's where I don't know whether or not there's overhead to support that. But I do know that when we've asked in the past, it's pretty straightforward that it's like it's not part of the HDMI specification, so it's not there. Unless the HDMI, kind of group decides and adds, a de-squeezed aspect ratio that could be sent out. And depending on what device that specification would apply to, unless that happens, I really don't think you're going to see that kind of thing from ours. But what you can do is what a lot of other people that are displaying out de-squeezed content is. You could always send the footage out. If you have a recorder that, say, supports RAW, you can send it out in 4:3 ratio or 3:2, depending on whatever lens you're using. Bring it into a recorder, and then almost all the modern recorders have HDMI out as well. So you could have the recorder do the de-squeeze and then send the signal out through that recorder. They have their ways of doing it and kind of getting around it. But within the cameras, it's a different world with that. Let's see here. I think I said this before, but man, imagine frame markers you could set for the camera to actually crop and save those videos. Maybe 2 markers to each SD card, no editing required. That would be a lot of overhead. That one I definitely know. Yeah, that would definitely be a lot of overhead. It comes up when we have to be silent or not distracting, forcing to use eShutter. Yeah, that's why, Macari, I can definitely see why it would be useful on the other cameras. I just don't know if they've ever really got a plan to put it in those. So yeah. Where did we go? Do you think it would be technically possible to enable proxy recording also in 6K mode? Imagine having an OpenGate 3.2 plus huge time savings in proxy. I think it would be technically possible. I just don't know. Like you can proxy anything, right? I think it's going to be more of the. It's going to be down more to whether or not it can be simultaneously recorded and in the full, like, say, 6K, and also be able to do the proxied resolution for it, and what resolution that would be. Things like 16:9 and 17:9 aspect ratio stuff, it's pretty straightforward. You're going down into 16:9 or 17:9 aspect ratio, so it's going to be a 1080 or 720p piece of footage. So the proxies are a little bit easier to just kind of direct pull down. OpenGate with 6K, at least my current understanding there is that just it's not ever been done before, at least in this kind of category camera. But things are always kind of evolving. I mean, we do have MP4 Lite now, which is a much lighter weight version and lower resolution of an OpenGate mode, which will segue because we're going to talk about that next in a second. which does make things a lot easier. But I guess to your point in there about, if you really do want that full 6K, but you want something that might be a little bit easier to work with, or maybe a lot lighter as far as the bit rate goes, there's possibility for those things. I just don't know from an engineering perspective what restrictions or what potential restrictions there could be within the engines to do this. I would have to actually talk to one of our engineers about that specifically. So, but I'll ask again. Last one I'm going to answer before we actually start talking about MP4 Lite here is, will the S1R be able to use LUMIX, the new LUMIX app? No. So cameras that came prior to the S5 Mark II, Mark IIX, so basically all of our PDAF cameras, all the phase hybrid cameras, they're running a new generation engine with new generation hardware components. So newer Bluetooth modules, newer Wi-Fi modules that are different than what were in all the previous generation cameras. So unfortunately, cameras prior to that won't be able to be compatible with LUMIX Lab. You'll still have to use LUMIX Sync with cameras prior to the new engine and PDAF equipped censored cameras. So yeah, let's talk about that MP4 Lite. So I'm in the video recording mode right now, and as a lot of people are kind of talking about, there is the way content has been created. Actually, let me just go back to my main camera here for a second. So the way modern content is being, kind of consumed and edited from a very large group of the industry. Not necessarily saying the full high-end, I'm a pro, I make all my money off video production, that kind of thing. We're talking a lot of the people that are just getting into this, that maybe social media is their number one priority of content delivery, right? That was the impetus to design and develop MP4 Lite with the release of the S9. It was also the reason why MP4 Lite only records in 30 frames per second. Social media delivery, so anything that's going to be on a mobile delivery platform, so iPads, iPhones, Android tablets, heck, even Windows phones, if you still have any of those, have a number of kind of challenges when you want to actually work with really higher end video footage. While processing has gotten pretty good in modern, like super modern devices, like within the last 2 years, or honestly more realistically within the last about a year, there is still a very, very large percentage of devices out there that are being used and connected into cameras for mobile devices, for mobile apps, that don't have what's really needed to do higher bitrate recording video content. So MP4 Lite, or what we like to call Open Gate Lite, is that 3.8K, which means that you're getting a 3840 pixel wide image. So you'll always have a 4K in 16:9 or 17:9 ratio. You'll always have 16:9 at least. You'll have proper 3840 pixels wide for it. And it has a much lower bit rate. It's a 50 megabit per second piece of footage that's in an H.265 compression. It's in 420 color, which means if you look at devices that support working with H.265 footage, that's 420 chroma subsampling, that's at 50 megabit per second, right around there, you have a way wider selection of devices, mobile devices, that can actually work and edit that footage natively. So jump to now, obviously we've added MP4 Lite into the S5 Mark II, the Mark IIX, the GH7, and the G9 Mark II. Now we've brought that mode into those other cameras, fully understanding that there are a ton of users that are working with these cameras that are also producing social media content. So maybe you don't want to necessarily go out and, pick up an S9 just because it has this mode and it does make things a lot easier. We're able to add it into the camera that you already have in front of you to, again, help make things a bit easier. And I mentioned before about the frame rates. So at 30 frames per second, the vast majority of social media content delivery, if being done right, is at 30 frames per second, 30 or 60. 24 frames per second, while many modern phones, so like both the phones that I have here, it's a 16 Pro Max and a Z Fold 6. Both of these can adjust their screen refresh rate to be able to match something like a 24 frames per second preview or playback. You end up running into some other problems where people that are using phones that maybe don't necessarily really respond well to 24 frame, you start getting choppy looking footage. When you go to edit some of these things, sometimes the apps and the phones just don't really play as nice with 24 frames per second footage that's not being processed by how the phones do it. It's why if you've ever looked at when you work with a proper camera, you have to be a little more careful with things like motion when you're on 24 frames, where your phones seem to have this weird, uncanny ability to smooth some of that out. You can think of some of this as like if you buy a brand new TV, right, and it has motion smoothing on, designed to correct some of that hitching that you see in proper cinema 24 frame. Phones have some of that ability. So when looking at it and how people are using the content and what it was designed for, it was designed at 30 frames per second. It was designed at 3.8K so that you get that 4K resolution, but also so that when you pull a vertical out of it, you have the same resolution pixel-wise as what a mobile device has for vertical resolution. So that brings to the follow-up of what a couple people have been asking in here before is, being able to use that MP4 Lite option, but in frame rates other than 30 frames per second. 100% that has been discussed and brought up to engineering teams, to the development team, that, hey, we're seeing a lot of people that are really appreciating MP4 Lite outside of the original area where it was designed, knowing that this was designed for social media content. Things like that, because we created this resolution. We came up with the whole plan for it. How do we handle taking the 6K resolution, bringing it into 3.8K? How do we take the 5.8K and bring it down to 3.8K if you're on Micro Four Thirds? But it was always done with 30 frames per second in mind. So changing over to be able to do and add potentially 24. I don't know if 60 would be able to be done that way. But the amount of work to do, basically add an entire new frame rate and codec there from a full sensor height and width readout just takes time. I don't know if it's something that is going to be added into the cameras, but we have heard everyone's feedback with it. And honestly, we're actually very excited because it shows that there's a lot more people than just who we design a thing for that are starting to adopt it and see a benefit there. Obviously, we have some inclination about features like this, that there is value to other users out there. But in some cases, things just, as development timelines are set, this is what was designed, this is what's developed, this is when it's going to come out, and this is what it was designed for. Cool. That's what happens. Changes to that, additions to it, improvements to it get added, but they take a little bit more time. And it's not as simple. I know there's always going to be people out there that are like, oh, it's just simple line of code to be able to add certain things. Quite honestly, if you don't write firmware for cameras, you have no clue how hard or easy it is to it. It's all a guess outside of that. I have discussed with engineers about how difficult it is to actually write major changes into code, especially making sure that nothing else breaks when you release. So making sure that stuff like the Bluetooth works, the Wi-Fi works after you do a firmware update, making sure that, things don't break across the board. That all has to get taken into account too. So when you want to have major things kind of get updated or added in, sometimes they take a little bit of time because there's a lot of QC that has to go in there to make sure that, things are being deployed correctly. But talking about MP4 Lite, so as we mentioned, that was one of the added recording modes to many of these cameras. So if you are looking to get the MP4 Lite option in your camera, first, make sure that you're up to date on the most recent firmware update. I have a video that I did 3 weeks ago, or 2 weeks ago, when we did make the announcement that walks through what the firmware versions are, so I encourage you to go take a look at that. But you're going to find MP4 Lite under rec file format and then MP4 Lite. And we point out here it's suitable for editing on smartphone applications. When you switch into this, you're going to notice that rec quality, you've got one option. 3840 by 2560. It's a 3:2 ratio because I'm on an S5 Mark II X. It's 2997, so it's a 30p recording mode. You're getting 420 10-bit, so you still get, editing functionality out of this, and it's at 50 megabits per second. So it's a generally lightweight version of OpenGate. The cool thing is that, as I mentioned before, this is full sensor width and height. So yes, it's not 6K, but OpenGate doesn't really have a resolution tied to it. OpenGate just means that you're not masking out for a different resolution than the native aspect ratio of the sensor. So in this case, 3:2 ratio. When using OpenGate, this is where, being able to use stuff like the frame guides becomes incredibly handy, so that you can record that full height and width of the sensor and be able to go in and say, hey, I want to be able to pull my vertical out of this. I want my 21:9 out of this, however you want the aspect ratio to be. You've got all of that flexibility because you've got that much more height and width to work with. And I'll change this again because you can see it here when I go back into changing this to, say, just MOV. So watch the side. Now, obviously, we're sending this out over HDMI, which means that it's a 3840 wide total image that contains pillar boxes. So now when I change it back into MOV, now you see that you get that full 16:9 ratio, but you also see how much you're losing on top and bottom. So luckily I can show you this while I'm sitting here, but you see that it's a pretty substantial amount of change for vertical capture that you're losing as far as resolution goes. And if you're someone that does general capture, right, if you're not going to be doing social delivery, you don't need vertical cuts out of your footage, OpenGate or MP4 Lite can still be a really beneficial way to film in anyway, because especially if you're doing 6K, 6K gives you that 3:2 ratio. You get more resolution than your 4K. So if you work in post and you want to do additional stabilization, or say you got to fix a horizon because maybe the camera was slightly tilted, having that full 3:2 ratio gives you just more palette to work with in post so that you can adjust things. And luckily, at least as far as I can say here on MacBooks, so I have a newer generation, not the newest generation, but last gen of the MacBook Pros, it handles 6K OpenGate footage with the 420 10-bit HEVC files. It just cuts through them like butter. My desktop that's running a Ryzen processor and an RTX 3080 Ti handles it without any issues. So you don't really have to worry as much these modern days with things like 420 10-bit, especially for HEVC. And as a side comment on this, because this has come up over in the Discord channel, which if you're not already following us over on Discord, it's discord.gg/LumixUSA. Go check it out. It's just another area where we're going to have a lot of information and cool stuff to talk about, and a really cool group of people over there. There's been a couple people that have asked questions over there about this, about, well, why don't we do 422 10-bit HEVC? And truth of the matter is that it's still on a global scale, it is still not the easiest thing to work with. Yes, I think it's Intel's, was it QuickSync? The modern MacBook or Apple products can work with 422 10-bit when it's in an H.265 file. And I believe now it's the new NVIDIA graphics card, the 50 series, 5080 series, or 5000 series, whatever they're called these days. Those have added support for 422 10-bit on an HEVC compression, but you got to look at what the mass market uses, mass users across the board use, and they're not using that kind of hardware. So you still have to take into account some of those things where, yes, there are some things that can support those particular modes, but the vast majority may not really be fully there, and we are always about reliability and user experience there. So if it's something that is going to be not something that anyone can just pick up and use, or put into any program, it makes it a little harder to make a decision like that to say, yeah, let's do that or not. The other thing is 420 10-bit HEVC is a standardized output, especially if you're talking about HLG delivery or hybrid log gamma, since we can record HLG in the camera. That's how it's supposed to be recorded. It's actually a specification for HLG for broadcast. So that's why some of that's there. But again, all of that to say, going into with the update, being able to do MP4 Lite, those are the kinds of the reasons why we have the aspect ratio. That's kind of the reasons why we stuck to 420 10-bit, 50 megabit per second, much easier to work on a much wider range of mobile devices, so that it's not a really cool feature that maybe people want to use, but now because maybe you have a phone that's 2-3 years old and you don't feel like going to buy the latest, greatest new phone just because it adds that support, this makes it easier for everybody across the board to actually be able to take advantage of these functions and use them in your more day-to-day life. Let's see here. Is it possible for the slow and quick mode to have an H.264 MP4 option? There are still clients who can't work with H.265 files, and they ask me to convert the slow and quick video shots. I think the challenge the issue you run into with H.264 in slow quick is that your bit rates will end up having to be way higher. On average, H.265 is twice as efficient as H.264. So if you wanted to have a fully comparable version in MP4, especially with H.264, to what you have currently, you would need something like 400 megabit per second in an MP4 wrapper that's H.264. And at that point, now you're generating a ton more heat. You're massively increasing file sizes, going from 200 to 400 megabit per second. It's not really relevant to the resolution that you're using. To make sure that the way slow and quick works, since it's over cranking or under cranking the sensor, to make sure that there's enough data to work with based on the compression that's being used. That's generally why you're not seeing an MP4 with H.264. And honestly, it's more likely that, I mean, you kind of pointed out here, H.264 versus H.265. The H.265 files are going to come out as MOV files. Obviously, H.264 can be MOV or MP4. More likely than not, people tend to have compatibility issues because it's an MP4 file, or it's an MOV file, not an MP4 file. If they're not using, editing software, because these are 10-bit files. If you're using the free version of Resolve, you run into problems there. If you're trying to preview that footage in, say, Windows OS through something like VLC, again, it goes back to the graphics cards. Some graphics cards do have support to view it, some don't. Some it comes into your CPUs. These are all those kinds of things that come up, and why in some cases it's just how it is, because of trying to find the sweet spot for compatibility for as many people as possible. Let me see here. I'm just gonna prioritize questions about the firmware update for now, because we're getting close to time again. What was this? How many cameras can you link with LUMIX Lab? I know only one actively at a time, but is there a set max for the library? I don't believe there's a set max. If there is, I have not hit it yet, and I've got, I think, 10 cameras connected or saved into the library, so I can swipe through them and have that camera ready to go with it. A lot of those are duplicates, because I when I work an event, or like during the launch of the S9, I ended up having like a bunch of people's cameras all set, because I was doing, setting the clocks on all of them. So I did it through using the app, which was actually a really easy way for me to set the time on all these cameras. And I'm terrible at removing cameras from there. Let's see here. We got a couple more there. How many cameras? Okay, so we did that one. Let's see here. Wrong. I was searching for TVs. Okay, so there's a conversation about social media there. Where Where did we go? Decreative, what would be your dream Lumix camera for both video and photos? Honestly, like right now, my kind of like go-tos, because I don't really ever concern with what's like things that don't exist as far as camera equipment goes. It's my S5 IIX when I know I want to do, say, maybe more intense astro kind of shooting and recording like on the go for, say, LUMIX Live stuff. But also it's my GH7 when I want the faster frame rates and stuff like that. So if there was like a combination of those two, that would be cool. You know, you get a lot of the functionality, speed, and stuff like that, maybe that the GH7 has. But I like having my flexibility of a 3:2 aspect ratio open gate. 4:3 is awesome, but I don't shoot enough anamorphic where I got really comfortable with the 4:3 ratio. I mean, for the longest time, I always shot on micro four thirds. And I still do love micro four thirds for the vast majority of general capture that I do. But 3:2 ratio, because I grew up with film photography, that it's just my brain thinks a little bit more in those terms, especially these days. So yeah, I guess Decreative, my dream would be taking something like an S5 IIX and melding it with the GH7. At least for now, because those things always change. Let's see here. Why was wired LAN streaming feature has been removed? So we did talk about this last week. There is a European regulation. I cannot remember the exact name of it. And unfortunately, I did not write it down. Let's see if I can find it. There is a European regulation. Where is it? It's going to take me a second here to find this. Okay. Okay, at the end of the stream, I'll see if I can find what the regulation was, but there is a regulation in Europe that has outlined IP-type devices. So the RTP, RTSP stuff falls under that. Not my decision as to whether or not timeline-wise when, you know, companies are going to comply to this or why certain companies comply to it and others are waiting. But again, don't get mad at me. Not my choice. That's a decision that's made by people that are paid way more than I do, that are way higher up in the company than I am. But I'll look to see if I can find the regulation or at least a reference to where it is for you. So I wanted to talk about, on the camera, there are two other things here that I want to cover as far as a firmware update goes. So I want to cover the autofocus modes because there are some changes to the AF modes if you're coming from cameras other than the GH7 and the S9. If you have either of those cameras, you already know these things because, one, we firmware updated them on the S9 a while ago, and the GH7 launched with them, so you've had them from day one. But if you're on any of the other three cameras, so the S5 Mark II, Mark IIX, or the G9 Mark II, you have a bunch of new autofocus modes that have been added into this camera. So I'm going to access them through the menu here. I think it's just a little easier so that you can see it. But what you're going to see is under subject detection options now, you're going to see the couple of the normal ones. So there's 4 normal ones that have been there for a while. There's human, airplane, car, and motorcycle. These have been in all of these cameras for at least a year, almost a year and a half. But the new 2 that were added is train and airplane. Now, personally, I'm not someone that would probably use either of those 2, but in many conversations I've had, especially with a lot of people that are not necessarily based in the US, where, you know, train travel is not really as common in the US, definitely way more common in European and in the Asian regions. Having these modes can be it's a really big benefit. And I do also know that there's there's an entire community out there that love being able to photograph airplanes. You know, jetliners taking off, landing. I mean, there's the whole spot outside the LA airport, right by the In-N-Out Burger, where you're right in a landing path. So you can get some amazing photographs there. So we've added in these modes into the camera as well. So you've got the train, which allows you to be able to come in and identify what part of the train you want to have the camera focus on, whether you want it to focus on the front car or you want it to actually kind of focus more on the cabin or the front end of the train. So we've got these options in the camera now. And it's the same for the airplane option. So you've got, as far as airplane goes, if you want it to prioritize, say, the nose of the plane or just kind of the general shape of it. What's nice about the way these modes are is that they're actually pretty easy to access and change. I'm going to show you the other way to get into them so that you don't have to dive into the menus for it. But you have quick access to it. Now, as far as the rest of the series go, human, animal, and car, or human and animal don't really undergo any changes. You still have your face, eye, and body, as well as just face and eye. And as a refresher, for those that are using the autofocus system, face and eye literally is just face and eye. If you turn away from the camera, if the person turns their head away, if they cover part of their face, it's going to default to whatever your AF mode was selected to. Face, eye, and body, if it can't detect the eyes, it will then divert to the head detection. So it's going to give you a lot more leeway and a lot more flexibility as far as like the actual recording there goes. But then we also have, as we go down a little bit further, now you've also got the car and motorcycle. Now we've had these and they've been more of a generic car and motorcycle detection. Here's a car, it can detect it, cool. Here's a motorcycle, it can detect it, cool. But now you've got the ability to come in and adjust the various different target parts as well. So the entire subject, this is how it was default prior to the firmware, versus now actually prioritizing the cockpit of the car. So trying to prioritize the helmet of the driver right in that area of the object. Same thing with motorcycle. Under the motorcycle detection, you now have the ability to target the entire bike, which is the general, kind of silhouette or look of a motorcycle. But a lot of times you kind of actually want to prioritize on the rider instead. And knowing that in the early days, you could use human detection, but the way like a sport bike rider is going to be kind of folded up on the bike, human detection may not always, pick that up because the person's not in a kind of normal stance and you don't have a face and eye to see, especially if they're being smart and wearing a helmet. So now there's the new identification here for being able to detect the helmet of the rider. These are all just designed to give you a more confident system for your AF detections, so that especially if you're someone new getting into working with a camera like this, or just subject detections in general, you now have extra tools that just help you. There's a lot of us out there that have been doing this for a long time, and subject detection modes, while they're cool, we may not ever really need them or really utilize them because, well, we've kind of always worked without them. But understanding that these are just things designed to help make things maybe a little bit easier for you, that's why we have them in these cameras. And honestly, I've seen some amazing stuff that people have been able to capture, especially highly experienced photographers. Now that you don't necessarily really need to worry about, do I have my autofocus point in the right spot? Am I in the right AF mode for it? I can now just leave it on the subject detection and just fully concentrate on my framing. It can minimize how much time you have to use in post for recropping or readjusting, because maybe you got the shot, it's sharp as you want, but it happens to be on the far left of the frame and you want it actually, more open side on the left side. It means you don't have to go in and use AI tools to like generative expand images and stuff like that. Because I know it's a very hit or miss as to whether or not people like using any of those things, but being able to use the tools in camera to help you where you can just focus on your framing means you can spend less time in post. It's a win-win for the vast majority of people. There is the other way to get to these modes though. So if you look on the back of your camera, you will also have the a little box that has 5 dots in a cross pattern. If you press on that, it's going to open up your AF mode dial here. This is where you're able to select what modes you want to work with. So center, or one area plus, zone, full area, or tracking. Just remember that these are what I call the fallback options. If there's no subject, what do I want the camera to do for focus? Do I want it to just be full area and pick whatever it wants? Or do I want to have guidance in case there's no subject in the frame? So 9 out of 10 times, my camera is usually on one area plus. This also is the target that will activate the subject detection. So your subject detection will turn on and identify that subject when they touch the box or the area that you have set for this. If you want to quickly be able to toggle the AF detections on and off, just literally press up on the directional pad, toggle it on and off. If I want to be able to jump in quickly and change what the detection subject is, press the display button. I can toggle through these, press down, toggle in through them this way as well. So it makes it really easy to get in there and make some selections. The other option you have is actually going in, and you can see it on here, is actually going into the main cog settings here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go into Q menu settings. We're going to customize this for, in this case, video, because I have the camera in a video mode. You can customize your quick menu to be isolated so that you have a photo quick menu and a video quick menu. I'm going to go into here, and let's say I'm going to select the one that you can see under my frame right here. Click on this. You do have the ability to scroll through here and then select detection subject. So now what this means is if I'm sitting here, I'm ready to go, I can press the quick menu, I can scroll to the subject detection mode, and I can press the button, and that is another way to get into that particular mode to make some changes for it. Let's see here. The last thing I want to talk about, this is very specific to the S5 Mark II X and the GH7. Someone mentioned before about live streaming, so I want to chat quickly about this. So on the S5 Mark II X and the GH7, these cameras have the ability to wirelessly stream content to various different platforms. There have been some changes to this, clearly, as we've kind of mentioned before, but this is going to be found in the setup menu, so the wrench icon, and then under the in-out option 1 and streaming. When you go into this mode, you're going to see two options for connection method. You're going to see USB tethering or Wi-Fi. USB tethering, very specifically, is to tether to the LUMIX Sync app. And I haven't done it yet with the LUMIX Lab app. I have to confirm and double check on that. But what this does is this allows you to have your camera wire connected to the app to use your phone's modem to connect in. So this removes one link of potential drop for connecting into the internet, right? So I'm going to leave this on Wi-Fi for right now. Then you have below that, you have streaming setup. Streaming setup is where I'm going to come in and I'm going to say, well, what bit rates do I want to use? How do I want to stream this out? When you use Wi-Fi, you're going to be limited to 1080p, so up to 60 frames per second in 1080p, and you're going to see that this is like 16 megabit per second. This is designed specifically because it falls within like what YouTube's recommendations are for streaming bitrate versus resolution. But if I wanted to do 4K streaming, this is where I'm going to come back. I'm going to change connection method, go to USB tethering, go down to streaming setup, and then you'll see I can now access up to 4K 30p. This, again, because of removing a potential Wi-Fi between your camera and your mobile device, and then your mobile device having to send everything up, because we can remove that extra Wi-Fi connection point there, it gives you a little bit extra as far as resolution goes. Once you have those things set up and you've kind of picked out what resolution you want, you have a couple things you can do. You can click in streaming addresses. This allows you to plug in your RTSP, or not RTSP, your RTMPS or RTMP, depending on where you are. This allows you to plug that in, which will be the stream key and everything, stream settings that you get from YouTube. From what I've been told, obviously I can't test this because I'm not in Europe, RTMPS is still available. Another thing that I understand is that as far as YouTube goes, you can stream with RTMPS, but you have to go through a couple extra steps to enable it in your stream, in the stream that you want to do. So keep those in mind. You do have the access and the ability to live stream with the camera, but you are going to be using RTMP. If you've never used that before, know that there is a little bit of latency, but The streaming will allow you to send your video and audio feed, so your microphones would go just right into the camera. It packages it all together, sends it up onto the platform that you're going to want to work with. And if you're someone that, say, likes to stream to, say, Twitch or Facebook, you can check their platforms, whether or not they support RTMPS, which is still the preferred way to do it. If you're going to do RTMP or streaming or direct wireless streaming, do it with RTMPS. It's more secure. RTMP works. It's kind of just the default for a lot of things, but it's also a lot more open to be able to have someone take over it. As I mentioned, those are the functionalities that are available on the GH7 as well as the S5 Mark II X. So streaming has not been removed. You still have the ability to stream. It's just certain ways of streaming or accessing the camera as, say, an IP camera have been changed, thanks to some of the regulation changes. That's what I had on my list, because last week we covered some of the other stuff. We covered hybrid zoom and crop zoom. There's a brief kind of recap on that. Hybrid zoom is only found on the S-series cameras. It requires a piece of communication between the camera lens and the body itself that Micro Four Thirds just at this point doesn't have. So you have hybrid zoom in full frame. All of the cameras have crop zoom functionalities. Hybrid zoom being able to pair the optic zoom, so the physical optical zoom of the lens, with progressive digital zooming. Crop zoom is applying a digital progressive crop that you can control using either the on-screen tools for it if you use the touch tab, or you can program a button in to say, hey, activate crop zoom for zoom, and then you can use your directional pad up and down or left and right to then digitally punch in and out up to the frame rate or up to the resolution that you're doing in video. In photo, you can set what your low side for the photo resolution size is for JPEG. And when you use this in the photo side, hybrid zoom or crop zoom, you have to be shooting RAW plus JPEG or just JPEGs. Your RAW files do get the benefit of being tagged in metadata as to where the crop was. So if you bring those RAW files into software like Lightroom, it will show you them as they're cropped, so as you shot them in the camera. But if you click on that crop button, you're going to notice that you get the full 24 megapixel image out of it to then work with later. All right, we're going to wrap this up with a couple more questions here, because there was a whole bunch of stuff that came through. Let's see here. Let's see. Who is the legend who designed that cute car for you mean cat for animal? You know, I've never actually looked at the animal detection icon. Oh, okay. I'll have to talk to the engineers, see who that was. Interesting. Let's hear. When is G100 getting an update for LUMIX Lab? It won't be. G100 is on LUMIX Sync. All the newer cameras, the LUMIX Lab requires the newer engine and some other new hardware that's in all the newer cameras that have PDAF. Let's see here. Also, another push for human-only detection, which holds the frame when there are no subjects. Yeah, we have brought that up to the engineers before. I know that there are some references out there of other cameras that kind of do pretty much what you're asking for. We've pointed it out to them to say, hey, look, is this something we can do too? Is it possible for us to do this? Because that's what y'all are asking for. Let's see here. Also, is there an option for manual focus override? It seems like some cameras have it, some don't. There is a manual focus override, but it depends. The way our systems have done it in the past is it's designed more in the photography side, because it's based on manual focus during AFS, where it'll lock focus, and then you can, while you're half pressing, you can then use the manual focus dial. In video, because everything's basically always continuous focus, unless you go in and manually change that, I think that's why it doesn't have it for video, but I can ask to see if that's something that could ever get ported over. I'm not high on thinking that that's going to happen. Can we get the option to reduce sharpness on the S5 IIX in a firmware update? I can ask, but I doubt it. The image from the S5 II and the 2X is what it is. We've gone over this, I think, many times over since the camera launched. Oh, and finally, is it possible to turn subject detection on or off while recording? Currently, you have to cut your video clip to turn subject detection off if something is going wrong. I gotta double check. I think I just never really run into a problem with it personally, because I use the one area, but I'm also not filming a lot of the stuff that like y'all film. So I gotta double check, and I can bring it up to engineers as well. Plus says, if I map hybrid zoom to a custom button, I would like it to cycle through on and off if I just press it twice. The moment it just brings up the menu and then it exits, on the second press. Yeah. That's how, that's kind of similar to how the frame markers were until the most recent update. Frame markers before, it was literally you could only toggle them on and off, but you couldn't like change anything about them. Now you can do that, but then now we also added that secondary mode. I will definitely bring that one up. I know that's been brought up before as well. Generic, did you happen to see my question about focus bracketing on the last live stream, or should I send an email? I 100% saw that. As far as it's a pretty common thing that we've gotten a lot of people asking about. So yeah. Let's see here. Generic, by the way, some outlets in Germany, Value Tech, believe that the EU regulation was misinterpreted by LUMIX. I'm going to trust the lawyers and the legal teams that our company works with as far as making decisions, not a retailer or a news outlet. Nothing against any of them. Obviously, I'm in a unique position because here in the U.S. they don't really impact us. But I trust what those teams have done. There's reasons why major companies, have people that know exactly what's going on with this stuff and are in communication with those that maybe write regulations and all that stuff. So, yeah. I appreciate the feedback, though, Generic. Let's see here. Where do we go? Can you use a USB-style manual cable release with the S9? Unfortunately, no. What you can do with the S9 though is you can use if you connect the lab or the lab app to it. There is a remote function now that's Bluetooth, so you'd be able to tap on the option and it would allow you to trigger the shutter and all that kind of stuff. Can we timecode sync the S5 Mark II on the LUMIX Lab app? In the past, Panasonic Image app could do it using the phone clock. I mean, technically, I guess you could. I don't know if I would consider that timecode syncing, because that's just more making sure that the in-camera clock is set to the same generated clock. So, I mean, you could do that. You can open up the LUMIX Lab app, go in, have it set the camera's date and time, and then just do that for each of the cameras. And theoretically, they should be all the same by the time you're done. Yeah, it would definitely be one way to do it, but it's not timecode. It's not embedding any kind of like the timecode info that way. I mean, you have timecode on the camera, but you would then have to go into your settings. Let me see if I can find that quickly. You would have to go into your settings and let me remember where it is. Here we go. So you'd have to come into your camera settings, go to timecode, timecode value, and then change it to current time. When you have that, and I believe now if I do this, so timecode is displayed. And I think I have it set on rec run. Let's do free run. Does it not display over HDMI? Yeah, so at that point, timecode's there, but it's running at the regular time, so the current time, instead of running as far as like a figure goes. So if I were to come in here, change value to manual input, Well, let's see, HDMI timecode out. Yeah, so because the S5 II and the 2X are not designed like the S1H was or a GH7, it's just different. These cameras were not designed to do the same things as far as timecode goes with the other cameras, but I think that could be a general way to maybe kind of at least keep your cameras very close as far as timecode goes, using the app to make sure that the time and date are set properly, and then coming in and just saying that you want timecode value to be the current time. That'll run off what the camera's clock is, and then, yeah, it could work for basics to at least be able to have a set of your cameras all set. The other benefit there, too, being that now all your cameras are properly date and time set up, so if you're a photographer, this is great. You've got multi-cameras, because now you've got everything in chronological order as far as your images go. Just make sure if you're working in a multi-camera environment in a photographer sense, under the settings option, you have the ability under the card to folder and file settings, where you can change the naming of these cards. You can also change the file naming. And then you can also do file number resets, and then you've also got copyright information that you can add in there. So just make sure if you're going to be doing stuff like that or multicam, just make sure you have your camera set up right. Back in the days when I was working, kind of helping with some wedding photography and doing some wedding photography, I remember everyone sitting there at the beginning of the venue, all looking over the back of our cameras on the camera date and time menu, just waiting for all of us to make sure that we're ready and hitting the OK button at the same time. Using the apps can definitely make that a lot easier these days. Yes, so with that, go back to main camera. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Hopefully this was helpful in giving you some insight on the updates, how they, some history into how they came about, how to use them, where to find them in the cameras, and yeah, hopefully you got some questions that you had answered. Next week, so the 13th, is going to be a pre-recorded stream. I'm out on some personal time there. That stream is actually going to be, it's an interview that I've done with Dustin Armstrong, Josh Walker, John Simo, and Dylan Cato. Now I feel bad. I can't remember if I've pronounced Dylan's last name correctly. Anyway, with the four of them talking about a project that, if you follow any of them, you may have been seeing some teaser content coming out. There's been a really cool project shot about the GH7, shot on the GH7s, with some amazing content that the guys have all created. So we have a little sit-down chat to talk about just kind of what their goals were within this project, working with the GH7 on the site, and also just about production, what it was like to go through this project, what the goals of the overall project were, as I said, what their individual goals were. So I encourage you to show all them some love. Tune in next week for the pre-recorded interview that we did. And then also, there will be a follow-up to that part of it over on Discord. So I mentioned this before. We have we're supporting Discord now through the LUMIX Creators channel. So if you've never used Discord before, I highly recommend taking a look and joining us over on Discord. You can get over onto the platform by just basically going to discord.gg/LumixUSA. I'll put a link down in the description below. You can join the community over there, join in on the conversation. There's a lot of cool stuff going on over there. There's a lot of people there that can help address questions that you can bounce ideas off of. Dustin's course that he's been doing. There's also some cool stuff over on Discord around that. So I encourage you all to go take a look at that. Again, it's discord.gg/LumixUSA. Because after the LUMIX Live portion, the interview about the overall project, there's also going to be an event over on Discord as well, where you'll be able to ask and talk to these gentlemen and get some more technical questions answered. So yeah, I highly encourage you to go take a look at that. check out, yeah, all the different social platforms. The one that I always forget about too is Reddit. We don't really have anything to do with Reddit, but I love what has been built over on Reddit as well. So that's the r/Lumix. Go take a look at all of those things. Actually, let me see if I can do this. Discord.gg/Lumix USA. And make sure I put the right one down in the chat here. Because I will actually put this down. Sorry, everybody. I'm trying to make sure I put the right link in here for Discord. Yes, there we go. All right, so discord.gg/Lumix USA. Hopefully that lets you click on that. If not, copy and paste it, throw it in there. Go over, join the Discord. I am on there as well. When you get on there, introduce yourself in the Introduce Yourself channel. It's a really cool platform, super cool for everyone to be on there. Sorry for that little break as I was, chicken typing on my laptop or my keyboard here. Where was I? Yes, Discord, Reddit, Instagram, all of those different platforms here on LUMIX Live. Join us everywhere. Reach out to us. You've got tons of resources to be able to chat with all of us, chat with other creators out there as well. It's a really cool time. I encourage you to all take a look at it. Other than that, thank you, everybody. And plus, yeah, I'm going to put it in the description below. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Awesome questions, awesome chats back and forth there. And I will see you in 2 weeks live here on YouTube on LUMIX Live. Yeah. Later. Bye, everybody.